Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I am starting a new mixed media piece today and this one is a lot of fun. This is actually an idea that I've kind of had in my head, which is not typically how I do things, but I've had this color scheme and this idea to do a different kind of print. So I wanted to give it a try and see what happened, and I'm pretty pleased with the results. So join me as I show you what I'm doing. So I'm starting with one of my 6 by 12 inch cradled boards that I've gessoed, and I wanted to start with a little bit of collage. So I'm using some of the music sheets that I have, and I'm just randomly cutting squares and placing them around the board. I'm not exactly sure where some of these notes are going to peek through, but I just kind of want them in a variety of areas so that when I am making the piece, I can kind of just go with the flow as I'm creating it, and there's probably going to be something in an area that I want without being too precise about it. So basically all I'm doing here is just cutting these strips of the musical notes, and I am applying them to my board with my Liquitex matte gel medium. There's going to be a link to that as well as all of the other materials that I'm using in the description of this video if you're interested in any of that. That is my preferred method of adhering collage down, although I did use a little bit of the gloss gel medium in one of the future parts because one of you actually commented on one of my last videos and said that it seems to, when you're using the tissue paper, it seems to melt into the background a little better with the gloss gel. So I thought I would give it a try, and I actually do think that is true. It's not that much different, but it was a little bit different, so I will probably continue to use that. Okay, so here I got out my texture paste again, and what I'm doing is using an artificial flower, and I did this a couple videos ago in a piece, and I really liked the texture that it created. This is modeling paste, and that will be in the link in my description as well if you're interested. Think of it as like plaster, but for art. If you used regular plaster on a canvas specifically, it would crack and fall off, but this is designed to work with other media, and it stays on the surface very nicely. So it's a little messy to use, and that's okay. I was able to rinse it completely off of these artificial flowers so that I could reuse them. So I tried a couple of different methods. One, I was spreading it directly onto the flowers and using it to stamp down, which worked nicely, and I also spread a little right onto the board and then stamped the flower in it to get an impression that way. And I like doing the mix of that because it gives a little bit of variation in texture, which is what I'm looking for in these pieces. And once this dries, it will be sandable, which I always do just to knock down the burr on it. That way there aren't any really sharp fine points that could be, accidentally broken off and then reveal the plaster underneath if you have it painted or something like that. So I do like to give it plenty of time to dry and then go over it just with a fine grit sandpaper and then clean all of the dust off before I put any more paint or anything else on top of it. So this, like I said, is a technique that I used a couple pieces ago, and if you've been with me, you probably saw that, but I really, really liked the texture that it gave. So I wanted to push forward with that because the whole point of experimentation is to find these new techniques that I like, and I thought, well, let's go with this one because it was going to work with the rest of this idea pretty well. So now I'm mixing some paint here. I have Winsor & Newton Winsor Blue, just a little bit of titanium white, and I'm putting down a little bit of Grumbacher Sap Green because I was looking to make like somewhere between like a Tiffany blue and a Robin's Egg blue with just a hint of green in it. And that is the exact color that I had in my mind. So now what I'm doing is covering the entire board with that. This is, of course, after I've let the texture paste dry and after it was sanded and dusted off. And all I'm doing is trying to get an even coat of the color down on top of everything. Now I'm going to go in with darker colors around the edges here, but I want this over the whole entire piece so that if some of the underlayers peek through, which they will, that they are covered with this, and it'll just kind of bring everything together nicely. I'm going in with my brush and kind of scrubbing in the areas over where the texture paste is, and I'm using an old brush for this, so don't panic, this isn't one of my good brushes. And I'm also going in with my color shaper, and I added a little bit of water to it, and I'm just moving that paint around just a bit so that I can reveal some of those musical notes that I had collaged on underneath. And I'm just doing this randomly. Again, there's this part of it, there's no real plan to. I just know that I want some of that to be revealed and some of it to be covered up. And that's all I'm doing here. And it will come through in the final design, but it's not going to look very planned and, you know, tight-handed on there, which is exactly what I want to happen. So I'm just going back and forth between the color shaper and the brush and adding more paint to areas where I think it needs more coverage, and just kind of going in and covering things the best I can. And now I'm going in with some Payne's Gray, and that is Grumbacher brand also, with a dry brush, and that is my big fluffy brush that someday I'm going to learn the actual name of, but for now I'm just calling it my big fluffy brush because that works, and it's what I typically use for all of my blending. I really like the way I can get the blend going dark to light from the edges and corners in. Now the blue is still a little wet there, so some of it is mixing, and that's okay. I actually like the way that happens so that it doesn't look like the Payne's Gray is just sitting like hard edged on top of there. So I do get a little bit of blend there, and I'm going in with a wet paper towel and wiping away some of it to reveal the texture underneath. I go back over and cover it up again with other darker colors, but I do this step so that some of that underneath is revealed, and again, everything is not like precise and perfect because that's not the look that I'm going for with this. So here I've let everything dry, and now I'm going in with more Payne's Gray, and I'm using that same brush to lay down the color, but I wanted to mix it in a little better and blend it with the dried blue that's already on there, so I did get another dry brush that you can see there, and I'm just going in once I lay down a little bit more of that color and blending everything from the outside in so that it goes from dark to light and makes a nice transition. You can really see on the left hand side there the texture from that floral print that I made, and I really love the way that looks. So it got really shiny there for a minute because I added a little bit of water. I did that because I didn't like the amount of darkness that I had gotten on there, so I just cleaned it up a little bit, and now I'm adding it in the way that I wanted it to go down in the first place. These pieces are so much fun to make. If you've not used the modeling paste, the texture paste, I really highly recommend trying some out. And I mean, you can make a texture with just about anything. I had those flowers that I experimented with. I love that. Anything that you've got texture on, pieces of fabric, I mean, even sponge brushes would work, excuse me. But just play around with it and see what kind of interesting textures you get. And it's a really great way to, so that the high points there are going to obviously hold on to more paint and create a darkness if you want them to, or you can do what I did before and wipe some of that off to bring the lightness back out. There's just so many different things you can do with it. It's a great way to add a lot of visual interest to a piece of art. I'm just going around the edges again, trying to create more of that darkness right at the very edges and bring it into the lightness in the center. And now I'm getting out some of my golden high flow acrylic in Mars Black, and I like this high flow for what I'm about to do with it for a couple of reasons. First of all, it has such a nice gloss to it that even before I spray the piece down with my gloss spray at the end, while I'm working on it, I can see what it's going to look like finished a little better this way. And I do like being able to kind of have that glimpse into the future of the piece. I'm applying it, I just poured a little bit out onto the paper plate that you can kind of see there on the right hand side, and I just lay that color shaper on just to pick a little bit of it up on the flat part. And I am kind of laying that color shaper parallel to the piece and just kind of smoothing it over the very highest points there, which is creating a lot of visual depth and texture. Just another step in this process with the texture paste that I really like to do. And when I move the top of the piece up into the frame there, you can see some of those musical notes popping through there. And that's kind of what I was talking about. I really like to just have a little bit of those peeking through here and there, not in any particular spot, but just randomly. I think it adds a lot of interest to the piece. So I'm going through the piece here now and continuing to add more texture, and I do this for a little while. Like, I'll sit back and look at it and think, okay, maybe it needs a little bit more. I also like to go around the very edge and make a dark line with the color shaper, and I'll do that and then I'll blend like I'm doing there, and this just kind of like a back and forth movement of getting the right shading and tonal values of what I'm looking for around there. So this part goes on for a little bit. But, you know, you can do whatever you feel is best. This is where some of the intuitive comes in with my piece. I am an intuitive artist, and I like to really just go by the feel of things in the moment. So I'm kind of just doing that now, going back and forth and figuring out where I want things to lay. I did go in with my dry brush and pull some of the high flow acrylic down. You can see the streaks there, and that was intentional. And I'm going in and doing more of that because I want to create kind of a misty ethereal feel there in the center for where I'm going to put the main object in the piece. But I really like that quality that it gives. So it pulls down in a streaky, almost rainy day feel. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I like the way that that lays there on the board, and I'm just going in and smoothing everything over, kind of blending it. I don't want to blend it too much because I don't want to lose those lines, but I also want it blended a little bit because it kind of then looked a little too much like the brush strokes. You could really see the brush strokes, which was not what I wanted. I just wanted to be able to kind of have that ethereal feel to it. While I finish up this part, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who took time to subscribe to my channel this week. That helps me out so much. So if you haven't done that yet, take a second here and go ahead and give me a subscribe and click the like button if you like what I'm doing here. I put out a video every single Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and I also do a short form video every Tuesday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time. So be on the lookout for all of those, and click your bell notifications so that you'll be notified when I put those out. So anyway, I'm just finishing up edging the piece, and I want that darkness right around the very edge there, and I will blend it inward a little bit, but I definitely want that dark line around the edge on this piece. And I will go in the next step off camera and paint the sides of the actual panel there a nice matte black color, and I'll have that listed in my description at the end there too for you. I buy that, I believe it's Saks Mars Black. I get it in a half-gallon jug, and I love that stuff. It gives the best coverage of anything that I've ever used. Okay, so here's where my idea came in. I had this idea in my head to do an apple print, and at first I wanted to do the print on the jelly plate, which I tried, and I liked it, but then I thought I'm going to go ahead and actually just ink up the apple itself and see what kind of a print I get from it. And I really liked the way that was turning out. So I actually went ahead and I did probably about 15 of these because I really liked the way they looked, and I thought they would actually look really cool just kind of framed by themselves. So I might do that and put some of those in my Etsy shop, which there's a link to that in the description as well. So at some point those will be on there. I just think they're kind of interesting, and is definitely an apple, but yet it's kind of, I don't know, dark and spooky, which goes with the feel of the piece. So I'm doing a whole bunch of these right now. I end up only using the one, but I figured while I had the apple there and the paint out, I was going to go ahead and just take all of the prints that I could take, and then I had a variety of them to choose which one I wanted to cut out to use in this piece. If you're going to try printing with any fruit or any kind of item like that, it's best to dry off the surface with a paper towel as best as you can first. Okay, so now that I have those apple prints done, I went through and I picked the one that I liked the best to put on there, and all I'm going to do is just cut that out. You can see there I did some in red too, just because I wanted to see what that looked like, and I thought they were pretty neat as well. So I picked the best one, and I'm just cutting it out here, and I'm cutting it as close as I can to the printed image. Now, because I've printed these on tissue paper, and this was just regular tissue paper, this wasn't the wet strength that I sometimes use, I try to use that whenever possible because A, I've got a ton of it, and B, it's a lot easier and cheaper to come by than the wet strength. So I like to use that just to show you that it is possible as long as you're careful with what you're doing. You can pull prints on that and use it just fine. So anyway, I'm cutting the majority of the blank tissue spots out. It will largely just dissolve right into the background, but I want to make sure of that. So I figured there's no sense in having a bunch of excess paper on there that I don't really need. I'm not being too crazy about it, but I am going in here with an X-Acto right now just to cut out just a tiny little bit around that stem area. And I was very careful there because, I mean, it is still tissue paper, so it's very fragile and you don't want to be rough with that. And I didn't want to rip the stem off because I thought that was a very real possibility. And also when I'm gluing it down here, I was very careful. I'm using the gloss gel medium here because I do want to get as much of that into the background as possible. So working with my placement here, I don't want it to be dead center because that is always a little unpleasing to the eye. My last piece, if you saw my video, I think that was one of the things that I didn't love about it, so I didn't want to make that same mistake twice. So I'm actually putting it in the lower third of the piece. And there's another reason for this as well, because I'm going to use some of my ransom note style lettering at the top, and I wanted to make sure that there was plenty of room. So I'm taking my card and smoothing it over just to remove some of the excess medium on there. And I'm being very careful, especially up around the stem area, because it will very easily pull off. And you can see there I had a piece of the bottom of the apple come loose there, but I went in with a fine tipped pen and was able to just put that right back where I wanted it. And now I'm just working on the rest of it to get it glued down to where it's not going to come up. I put an extra little layer on top. I always add some medium to the substrate, and then I go over it with another layer as well to make sure it is down there really well. So I'm going to include this little piece. I usually skip this part for you, but I haven't done it in a video in a while. So what I'm doing here is making those ransom note style letters. And all I'm doing is I cut some random not random. I had words that I wanted to use in this piece, and I went into some magazines and just cut letters out in varying sizes and fonts to use for this. And this is something I started doing a couple of months ago, and I'd never seen anyone do it before. I'm sure someone probably did because it seems pretty obvious, which is what I said in the video the first time I used it, but I hadn't ever seen it. So I wanted to try it, and it worked pretty well. Now, granted, I will typically cut out about 3 times as many of each letter that I actually need because sometimes they work out wonderfully and sometimes they don't. My tip for getting these to transfer is do them in small batches. And I do that because you want to get the paint, first of all, really thin on there. Thinner the better. And because it's thin, it'll dry pretty quickly. So and these are like tiny little squares of magazine paper that you're dealing with, and they're fiddly and they're hard to pick up and they're hard to put down, so it does take a little bit of time. So I typically only do about 5 or 6 at a time, and I lay them down very quickly. I just lay the paper on top to pick up the paint around it, and as soon as I pull that up, I lift them right off. And I've had pretty good luck that way getting the images to transfer. Now, it doesn't happen every time. I did have to go in, and I didn't show all of this on the video, but there were several rounds of this that I did to get certain letters that wouldn't print. For some reason, I could not get the letter I to print. I tried 3 different times, and of course I needed, 2 of them for this, so I just had to keep searching for letter I's in my magazines, and I think eventually I actually even kind of just cheated a little bit and drew one in on there, but it does work for the most part. You just have to have some patience with it. Okay, so now that the letters are down there, I went in with some of my matte gel medium and a piece of tissue paper, and I edited out a lot of the drying process here, but you want that to dry on there completely, so I actually let it go for a while, and then you can see that it picked up those letters on there, and I'm going to cut those out and adhere them down to the board, and they're going to look like magazine, like ransom note style cutout letters. I really like the way it looks, and I also really like the blank squares on the pickup sheet. So I have had kind of like a very loose idea rolling around in the back of my head of something to do with those. I'm thinking on a larger canvas, but I'll get back to you with that idea. So for now, I'm just going in with those little letters, and I found the best way to do this is lay down some of the medium first, and then with your brush go over and pick up the piece and then lay it down on the board wherever you decide that you want it to go. Trying to pick them up with your hands, which probably have some of the medium on them at this point, is just kind of disastrous, and you'll end up tearing them and having to go back and reprint. So handling them with your hands as little as possible is good, and just using the brush, which has the medium on it, so it's picking them up and kind of sticking it to the brush, I've found to be the best way to go. So the phrase that I chose here is pick your poison, because I think that went along with the apple theme nicely. And the whole thing has a dark and eerie feel, kind of like Grimm's fairy tale, kind of dreary, and I don't know, like a witch in the woods or something. So that's why I chose those words, and I think it worked really nicely. You let me know what you think in the comments here. But I love the way all of these techniques work together to create this very ethereal, spooky, eerie kind of feel, and it worked with that color scheme too. I mean, you would typically think of that kind of robin's egg blue as a more upbeat, happy color, but one of the things that I like to do in my art is take a color that's typically associated with happiness, like a bright yellow or a bright blue, and use it, try to find a way to make it elicit a different emotion, and I think I achieved that here. Okay, so here I really decided that that apple had to have a leaf on it, and I wanted something that was going to fit there nicely. I realized that an apple leaf is much larger, but for the position of where the words were and everything, that's the size I went with, and I think it worked out really well. So now I'm going in with my Micron pen and touching up some of the lettering, because while you could read it if you're up close, I wanted it to be a little more visible from a little further away. So I'm just going in with that fine-tipped pen and not necessarily outlining, just tightening up some of the print on the letters so that it's a little more easily recognizable from a distance. And you can even see from the distance of where the camera is to the work surface that that really helped out a lot. I'm also taking the pen there, and I went around and touched up parts of the apple that I wanted to be a little bit of a darker outline. And now I'm adding in some of my line work that I like to use in a lot of my pieces. And this is just a series of different lines. It's kind of an organic feel, which goes with the floral print that I used for the texture paste. And I'm just going in and putting in a series of these to pull the whole entire piece together, because it needed to have a little bit of something there to draw the top to the bottom and make the image and the words make sense with the overall composition. I did go in here to speed up some of the process, and I edited out certain portions just so you would get the general idea of what I was doing without actually sitting here and making you watch me draw lines over and over again, because that doesn't sound like it would be very exciting for anybody. But you get the gist of what I'm doing, and in a moment here I will have the piece finished for you, and you will see what I've come up with. Now, I will have this piece for sale on my Etsy shop, and there's going to be a link to that in the description box for you. Oh, and to anybody that has been following, I do have a link for the Westmoreland Art Nationals competition that I am in. The People's Choice Award voting is up. I'm going to set down a link. I will say, and this is very frustrating, and I've emailed 3 times about it, my piece is sideways in the listing, and this is a Facebook listing, by the way. That's the only way that you can do the voting. So if you have a Facebook and want to check out the art, there's some really great art in there. Pick your favorite one. Does not have to be mine. In fact, I definitely would only prefer you to choose your favorite one, but I will put the link there. And anyway, this is my final piece here. It does not have a name, and it will shortly, because I will have to come up for one when I put it on sale in my shop, but I'm really pleased with the way it turned out. I hope you are too. I hope you enjoyed the process, and I hope you will continue to join me on my artistic adventures and experimentation. And thank you all for coming today, and I can't wait to see you again next week. Take care and have a great week.